Welcome back to our news bulletin. The COVID-19 pandemic has killed more than 70,000 people across the globe. Out of a total of 70,000 killed in the outbreak, 50,215 are in Europe. The latest figures have been compiled from official government data and the World Health Organization. More in this report.
Over 1.2 million cases have been registered in 191 countries. According to the WHO, out of these cases, over 240,000 have recovered. More than 21,000 people have recovered out of 91,246 patients in Italy. The country currently leads the global death toll with 15,877 fatalities. In Spain, over 13,000 patients have died out of 100,035 people infected with the outbreak. The Spanish government said the pace of COVID-19 related deaths in the country slowed again on Monday. France has reported at least 8,078 deaths and 92,839 infections. Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire said France is facing its deepest recession since the end of the World War II because of the widespread lockdown. Britain's National Health Service said at least 4,897 people have died due to the outbreak. It said nearly 48,000 people have tested positive across the country. The death toll in the US draws near to 10,000 as 1,200 people have died from the virus in the last 24 hours. The US has reported over 337,000 confirmed COVID-19 infections. 9,652 people have died in the US, by far the highest tally in the world. In Iran, the government said the trajectory of coronavirus infections appear to have started a gradual downward trend. The health ministry said Iran's overall death toll has reached 3,739 with 60,500 cases registered.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 5 people have died from the coronavirus in the last 24 hours, bringing the death toll to 50. The health ministry says nearly 400 new cases were reported in a day, raising the total to 3,277. The ministry said 257 patients of coronavirus have recovered so far across the country. It said the Punjab province leads in infection cases with 1,493, while Sindh has 881 infected patients. Northern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province has 405 cases, while 191 are confirmed in Balochistan. A total of 35,875 tests have been conducted so far, with over 1,930 done in the last 24 hours. Earlier, Pakistan's Planning Minister Asad Umar said the country has slowed down the spread of the coronavirus due to social distancing. In India, Amnesty International has asked Assam's government to release captives from detention centers amid COVID-19 threat. In a statement, it said Indian citizens declared as foreigners in a discriminatory manner are being kept in inhumane conditions in the detention centers. The body said the state government must understand detainees face a high risk of infection of the deadly virus. It said some detention centers with a capacity of about 250 inmates have up to 400 prisoners in them. Quoting a former detainee, the body said 60 to 70 prisoners are being kept in one room with no ventilation. Last year, India declared around 2 million people in Assam, mostly Muslims, stateless under National Citizen Register. Meanwhile, in India, the United Nurses Association has filed a petition in Supreme Court saying the medical staff is ill-equipped against COVID-19. The organization said the government has not formulated national management protocol for COVID-19 to address serious concerns. In its petition, the association said medical personnel are facing extreme risks while treating coronavirus patients. It said health workers are at front of the fight against pandemic and are exposed to hazards that put them at risk of infection. It said Medics are facing long working hours, psychological distress, stigma, occupational burnout, and physical and psychological violence. India has so far reported 118 deaths from the virus and over 4,000 infections so far. Moving on to Iraq, where 3 rockets have landed near the American oil service company Halliburton site in Basra. No casualties have been reported after the attack. In a statement, the Iraqi military said a launcher with 11 unfired rockets was found in the vicinity. The military said no group has immediately claimed responsibility for the rocket fire. It said the latest attack was the first since last summer to target U.S. energy companies working in the oil-rich South. Halliburton is an American oil service provider working in the Zubair oil field, which is operated by the Italian ENI. Turkey says it has killed 5 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in a counter-terrorist operation in northern Iraq. In a statement, Defense Ministry said the military carried out operations backed by air power in the Hakkuk and Avasin Bazian regions. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. Yemen's Prime Minister Ma'in Abdul Malik says the Houthi rebels continue to commit hideous crimes against the civilians. In a statement, Abdul Malik said the attack on Taiz prison is a clear indication of the rebels' motive to go on with their hostile policy. On Sunday, the militant group attacked the women's section of Taiz prison, killing 6 inmates and wounding dozens of others. Abdul Malik said the rebels have rejected to establish truce and peace in the region. He said Houthis' attacks are solid proof to the international community that the militia is determined to further deepen the conflict. Yemen has been entangled in violence since 2014 after Houthis overran much of the country, including the capital, Sana'a. Meanwhile, Palestine's Islamic Jihad resistance movement has urged Israel to lift its blockade of the Gaza Strip amid COVID-19 threat. In a statement, the movement said Tel Aviv must choose between releasing Palestinian prisoners or facing the consequences of the pandemic. The organization said it will protect Palestinians if they face any trouble due to Israeli blockade. It said Palestinians should adopt a firmer stance against Israel, whose blockade has made the daily life difficult. Since 2006, Israel has imposed a blockade on the Gaza Strip, which houses nearly 2 million Palestinians. In the Gaza Strip, 12 people have been diagnosed with the coronavirus so far. The United Nations has dispatched 59 truckloads of humanitarian aid to Idlib in northwestern Syria. Millions of people are in desperate need of the assistance in these conflict areas. Trucks entered the city through Turkey's southern Hatay province, which borders Idlib. The supplies will be distributed to people struggling to survive in Idlib and nearby rural areas. Syria has been mired in a vicious civil war since early 2011, when the Assad regime cracked down on pro-democracy protesters. According to the UN, hundreds of thousands of people have since been killed and more than 10 million others displaced. In Mali, 20 soldiers have been killed in a militant attack in the latest bout of violence in the northern town of Bamba. Military officials said the terrorists attacked a military base in the region. It was not immediately clear who carried out Monday's attack. The country has been struggling to contain a revolt that first broke out in the north in 2012, which has since spread to the center of the country. Thousands of Malian soldiers and civilians have died in the conflict to date, despite the presence of French and UN troops in the country. Moving on to Libya, where UN-recognized Government of National Accord says it has hit a military cargo plane of Khalifa Haftar's Eastern Army in southern Tripoli. Libyan army spokesman Mohammed Gunonu said the aircraft was loaded with ammunition and weapons for Haftar's forces. He said it was targeted minutes after landing in a Tarhuna airstrip. Officials said the aircraft was in Antonov and was hit by a Libyan Air Force drone strike. They said forces set up the new airstrip in Tarhuna urgently to receive ammunition for their fighters. Libya has been torn apart by a civil war between the GNA and the Libyan National Army since April last year. Meanwhile, Libya's former Prime Minister Mahmoud Jibril has died in Cairo after contracting the coronavirus. Ex-head of rebel government had been quarantined at a hospital in the Egyptian capital since 26 March. Jibril was the interim leader until the country held its first 3 elections in 4 decades in 2012. He was a former technocrat and was sidelined following a law which banned former Gaddafi officials from public office. Libya is now split between an internationally recognized government in Tripoli and rival forces led by the Eastern Military Commander Khalifa Haftar. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Health authorities in several Arab countries have confirmed new cases and deaths from the novel coronavirus. Governments across the Middle East began further expat repatriations as well.
Saudi Arabia has confirmed 61 new cases of COVID-19 infection, increasing the total to 2,463. Lebanon recorded 1 new fatality, raising the death toll to 19, along with a total of 541 confirmed cases. The Kuwaiti Health Ministry confirmed 109 new cases, increasing the total to 665. Oman's Health Ministry said the number of coronavirus cases has risen to 331. In Morocco, the health ministry said the death toll climbed to 71 after 1 more death was recorded. The number of confirmed cases in the North African country rose to 1,113. The Palestinian government has recorded a total of 252 cases so far, with 12 of them in the blockaded Gaza Strip.
In another news story, European tourists stranded in the Latin American countries of Bolivia and Peru are flying back home. French, Spanish, and some Belgian tourists boarded flights with the help of Bolivia's French embassy. This report has details.
Top EU diplomat Joseph Borrell said the repatriation of EU nationals began in mid-March. He said the number of people looking to return is increasing as more of them seek assistance through their embassies. Arranging such flights has become exceedingly difficult as most countries have banned air travel to contain the COVID-19 pandemic.
In view of the situation now, I have not been with my family in Belgium for a year. I am seeing what is happening and I think it would be better to return, although my heart and my will say no. I would like to stay here longer.
Officials said over 250,000 European citizens remain trapped abroad even after the EU's repatriation of about 350,000 people.
Singapore has placed 20,000 foreign migrant workers into lockdown for 14 days as coronavirus cases surge in the city-state. 2 dormitories housing mostly South Asian construction workers have been isolated. 1 dormitory has about 13,000 workers and 63 virus cases, while the other dormitory houses 6,800 workers and has 28 COVID-19 cases. Officials said the workers will be paid and given 3 meals a day. Last week, the government announced a circuit breaker policy to begin from Tuesday, similar to the lockdown seen in other countries. A spokesman for British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has confirmed he is in good spirits at the London hospital. Johnson was admitted to hospital for tests related to the COVID-19 infection, but will remain there for observation. Johnson had been isolating in Downing Street after testing positive for the virus last month. He was taken to hospital on Sunday night because he still had a high temperature and his doctors felt he needed additional tests. His office said the Prime Minister was doing well and that he would undergo routine tests as a precaution. But Downing Street declined to say which tests he would have on 27th March. In Ivory Coast, police have clashed with protesters who had begun dismantling a half-built coronavirus testing center in Abidjan. More than 100 residents in Yopougon started pulling apart the hangar-like structure and built barricades out of burning tires nearby. Protesters hurled rocks at police, who dispersed it with tear gas. Police said the hostility arose from a misunderstanding that patients with COVID-19 would be treated at the center. The Health Ministry said the center is one of several being built in Abidjan for voluntary mass coronavirus testing. Authorities have closed schools, places of worship, and most shops and imposed a nighttime curfew. So far, the country has registered 261 confirmed cases and 3 deaths. Greece has placed a second migrant camp near Athens under lockdown after an Afghan resident tested positive for the coronavirus. Migration Ministry says camp in Malakasa has been placed under isolation for 14 days with no one allowed to enter or leave. The ministry said the Malakasa facility currently shelters over 1,700 people. First outbreak surfaced last week at a facility in Ritsona near Athens, where 23 people out of over 2,500 have tested positive. Tens of thousands of asylum seekers are living in dire conditions in Greek camps. Campaigners have called to evacuate migrants in overcrowded camps amid coronavirus pandemic. Moria camp on Lesbos Island has been repeatedly criticized for inhumane living conditions as it hosts over 20,000 refugees. In the U.S., a 4-year-old Malayan tiger has tested positive for the novel coronavirus at the Bronx Zoo in New York City. It is the first known case of a human infecting an animal with COVID-19. Zoo officials said the test result was confirmed by the National Veterinary Services Laboratory in Iowa. They said Nadia, along with 6 other big cats, are thought to have been infected by an asymptomatic zookeeper.
We tested for common viral and bacterial pathogens of domestic cats, because that, of course, is much more likely to have been the cause of the infection. But of course, because New York City is in the middle of, this COVID pandemic and we're the epicenter for the U.S., it was logical to wonder and worry whether she could have been infected too.
In Indonesia, a 6.1 magnitude earthquake has jolted the Maluku province. Meteorologists said the epicenter was located 122 kilometers northwest of Jalolo at a depth of 10 kilometers. The agency said the quake did not pose a potential threat for tsunami. It said tremors were also felt in nearby province of North Sulawesi in the central part of the country. There are no immediate reports of casualties or property damages. Cyclone Harold has reached the Pacific nation of Vanuatu with the winds of 215 kilometers per hour. The cyclone has been classified as a Category 5 storm. Vanuatu is home to around 300,000 people and is already in a state of emergency because of the coronavirus. The Red Cross says the cyclone has blown roofs off buildings and brought down power lines. It said some people have taken shelter in caves to protect themselves. Cyclone Harold has already killed 27 people in Solomon Islands after the victims were swept off a ferry that defied storm warnings. The UN says greenhouse gas emissions are down and air quality has improved during the worldwide lockdown over COVID-19 pandemic. But UN's head of environment program, Inga Anderson, has cautioned against viewing this as a boon for the environment. In an editorial, Anderson said reduced emissions are temporary as they come amid a tragic economic slowdown and human distress. She said the outbreak will have profound and lasting economic and social consequences in every corner of the globe. Anderson said the pandemic will also result in an increase in the amounts of medical and hazardous waste. The UN Environment Chief said only long-term systematic shifts will change the trajectory of carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. The UN has urged world governments to include the protection of women from domestic violence in the response to deadly COVID-19 pandemic. Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for an emergency setup for women to seek support without alerting their abusers. Meanwhile, in the UK, domestic abuse helpline calls have jumped 25% since the enforcement of lockdown. Charity Refuge says National Domestic Abuse Helpline received hundreds of more calls last week compared to 2 weeks earlier. It said visits to the helpline website for information were 150% higher than during the last week of February. We're taking a short break. Stay with us. In our top business story on oil markets, Moscow has once again expressed its readiness to coordinate with other leading oil exporting countries to help stabilize the global oil market. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the talks between OPEC and other leading oil producers were delayed until Thursday for technical reasons. He said preparations for the meeting were underway. Meanwhile, the head of Russia's wealth fund, Kirill Dmitriev, said Saudi Arabia and Russia are close to a deal on oil production cuts. The IMF has cited limited but encouraging signs of a recovery in China, the first epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it said it could not rule out a resurgence of the virus. In a blog post, top IMF economists said the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed the world into a recession. They called for a global coordinated health and economic policy response. They wrote that China's fast recovery suggests containment measures can succeed in paving the way for a resumption of economic activity. The economists also mentioned that the US economy was experiencing the consequences with unprecedented speed and severity. Japan is declaring a state of emergency in Tokyo and 6 other prefectures tomorrow in a bid to stop the coronavirus. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe announced the decision as the government prepares a stimulus package to soften the economic blow of the virus. He said the state of emergency would last about a month. Abe said it will give governors authority to call on people to stay at home and businesses to close down. But he clarified that the government will not order the kind of lockdown seen in other countries. Tokyo residents welcome the decision, although some wish the pronouncement had come earlier. More than 3,500 people have tested positive for the coronavirus in Japan, and 85 have died.
The duration will be about 1 month. We need further cooperation from citizens to minimize contact between people, which can lead to infections. We need to well prepare the medical system. A state of emergency will be declared for these reasons.
Tech giant Apple says it will start making face shields for medical workers fighting COVID-19. In a video on Twitter, Chief Executive Tim Cook said Apple is aiming to produce 1 million face masks per week. Cook said the equipment will be supplied first to the US medical workers and then distributed globally. He said Apple has also sourced 20 million face masks, which it is donating worldwide to help prevent the spread of the virus. Meanwhile, in the UK, defense firm Babcock said it will manufacture 10,000 ventilators to help deal with the coronavirus crisis. US stocks jumped on Monday as Wall Street rebounded from a steep sell-off in the previous week. Traders took heart from news of falling death rates in countries hard hit by the virus, even as US cases were poised to spike. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is trading higher by almost 4.5%. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq Composite indices also opened higher by around 4.5%. European markets are trading higher as the rate of coronavirus infections appears to be slowing in the region. Meanwhile, the stocks in Asia Pacific rose on Monday. European markets are trading higher as the rate of coronavirus infections appears to be slowing in the region. Frankfurt's DAX is trading over 3.5% higher over fresh rally in stocks. CAC 40 in Paris has gained over 3%. London's FTSE 100 is trading about 2% higher as British security firm G4's stocks jumped 22%. In Asia, Nikkei 225 led the gains, closing over 4% higher as shares of SoftBank Group soared over 7.5%. Seoul's Kospi and Hang Seng Index gained ground, while Shanghai Composite lost over 0.5%. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price is trading 2% lower. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.